In 2019, nearly 10 million children in the U.S. lived in high poverty neighborhoods, where at least 30% of residents lived below the poverty line. Children who grew up in disadvantaged contexts tend to show greater mental and physical health problems than those who lived in more advantaged neighborhoods, says Ariana Gard of the Department of Psychology. The brain is one of the first organs in the womb to develop and doesn't stop developing until the age of 24. Throughout this development and onwards, the brain never stops changing, continuously building new pathways based on our experience or in response to damage, the process of neuroplasticity. Gary Evans of Cornell University finds in his study a marked tendency for low-income families to be exposed to greater than 3 multiple stressors, whereas middle-income families tended to be exposed to only 0, seen in double the mean of stressors. With regard to these facts, this begs the question: how has low socioeconomic status in the urban U.S. cities affected the developing brain of its inhabiting youths in the past decade? After careful consideration to how financial factors play a role in their day-to-day lives, we can confidently say that factors of low socioeconomic living in urban U.S. cities may lead to adverse brain development in children. Let's begin by inspecting the biological differences in the brain visible in an early age. In a study between ages 3 to 20, neuroscientist Kimberly Noble found that low socioeconomic status was associated with decreased cortical surface area in widespread regions of the frontal, temporal, and parietal cortex. Correspondingly, cognitive performance tests of attention, memory, vocabulary, and reading were also administered, finding that low socioeconomic status is also strongly associated with poorer test outcomes. The association was stronger at the lower end of the family income spectrum, says Brian Kolb of the Department of Neuroscience. These findings are significant as the frontal lobe controls thinking, impulse control, and expressive language, the parietal lobe contributes to sensory processing and spatial awareness, and the temporal lobe contributes to auditory processing and memory encoding. Findings from Kolb show a large vocabulary discrepancy around 2 years of age between the high and low income socioeconomic status families, and reveal that by age 4, the average lower income child would have been exposed to about 30 million words fewer than their upper income child. In addition, the association between low socioeconomic status and decreased cortical surface area was associated with behavioral problems such as rule breaking, excessive aggression, and hyperactivity, continued Kolb. I would like to emphasize before proceeding that correlation does not equal causation. It cannot be assumed that a child from low income status will experience these differences or that a child from upper income won't. As Kimberly Noble says, the brain is not destiny, thanks to aforementioned neuroplasticity. It is no surprise that functions of the brain are vital for learning, in addition to school quality. Aria Anasari of the University of Texas compares the test scores of kids attending subsidized center-based care with kids attending public preschool, and found that those in public preschool scored higher on reading and math tests and had comparatively higher end-of-year grades. Also playing a role in socioeconomic achievement gaps is the school funding. Kendra Bishkoff and Ann Owens of the Department of Sociology state that local property taxes are a primary source for school district revenues, which result in unequal resources in high and low poverty wealth districts. Kendra Bishkoff and Ann Owens continue that school funding affects the quality and quantity of teachers and administrators that a school can hire, facilities, course materials, and extracurricular offerings. They continue that recent research has shown higher levels of school funding's increase in individuals' completed years of adult education. In addition, gaps in standardized test scores between high and low income students are smaller where funding is more equal between the high and low districts. Ariana Gard of the Department of Psychology continues that neighborhood crime and danger are tightly linked to neighborhood income and may impact young children via stress responses, even when children are in the home. Stressors identified in a study by Gary Evans were density, noise, housing problems, family turmoil, family separation, and violence. Between poverty and middle-income families, you can see by the exposure percentage that that the stressors were increasingly felt by those in poverty with at least double the frequency in all categories. A stressor is defined by David Myers, psychologist, as catastrophic events, significant life changes, and daily hassles that challenge or threaten us. The brain has a built-in system to deal with the stress called the general adaptation syndrome. Myers continues that in response to stress, the outer part of the adrenal gland secretes glucocorticoid stress hormones, such as cortisol. In phase 1 of the general adaptation syndrome is the alarm reaction. The sympathetic nervous system is activated as heart rate increases. And during phase 2, resistance, temperature, blood pressure, and respiration remain at an all-time high as the adrenal glands continuously pump stress hormones. Phase 3, exhaustion, is when the sympathetic nervous system tires and leaving the body more vulnerable to illness. Prolonged stress can cause damage to the brain, slowing its production of new neurons and degenerating some neural circuits, says David Myers. The stress levels of impoverished middle-income families were measured in a study by Evans by the prevalence of stress hormones in the blood. Comparatively, the families in poverty showed higher amounts of stress hormones and double the amount of cortisol. Gard notes that it is equally important to study the positive aspects of the neighborhood that may promote adaptive neurobehavioral development. Studies have shown that qualities such as high social cohesion and collective efficiency may protect youth in disadvantaged neighborhoods from developing psychopathology and promote adaptive behavioral outcomes. In addition, exposure to toxins is another mechanism in which linking poverty to brain development. The children sampled from Ariana Gard's longitudinal study, the children were born into low-income urban settings where rates of soil-based lead poisoning are higher relative to non-urban settings. Eric Bender from Urban Evolution notes that impoverished neighborhoods tend to have higher temperatures, greater exposure to pollutants, and other environmental disadvantages. Another common source of stress for struggling families is food insecurity, a lack of consistent access to nutritious food that affects 1 in 5 children in the U.S., says Kate Cairns of the Department of Childhood Studies. In a research study, she interviews youths living in Camden, New Jersey, 9th on the list of top 10 U.S. food deserts. Shaylin, a 17-year-old who lived with her mom and younger sister, expresses her stress from food security most viscerally through her mom's emotional strain. When her mother worries over tough circumstances, she tries comforting her, but says, and I quote, "After a while, there's just nothing left to say." Unsurprisingly, mood and anxiety disorders were found to be most common among adolescents living in food-insecure households than in those living in food-secure households, prevalent through adulthood. Vivian Hazard of the Sanford Center for Biobehavioral Research asked participants of a nationally representative survey question, how many months in the past 12 months did you either cut the size of your meals or skip meals because there wasn't enough money to buy food? As pictured in the graph, mood, anxiety, and bulimic eating disorders were the most prevalent, the black points indicating the mean. In the same study by Kate Cairns, 15-year-old Camden resident sees income as the most significant factor shaping dietary choices. He says if organic food was cheaper, more people in his community would opt for it in compliance with their food samples. This supports the findings of Lisa Nackers from the Department of Preventative Medicine that conclude, compared with food-secure participants, marginal or very low food-secure caregivers reported significantly more obesity-promoting foods in the home, more microwavable or quick-cooked frozen foods, and greater access to less helpful foods in the kitchen. In conclusion, socioeconomic status plays a role in added stress through the encouragement of food insecurities, unequally funded school districts, and the equality of neighborhoods, contributing to a great deal of stress in adolescent brain and therefore infringing on their brain development. Modified public health and policy decisions may help, however, many forms of adversity co-occur, therefore there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Increasing family incomes may also benefit, but in addition to this, improved family dynamic and involvement would be needed for optimal impact. Thank you.
All right, 2 questions I have for you. First up, how did your research question evolve as you moved through the research process?
Well, throughout the research process, my research question evolved through inspecting the different aspects of psychology involved. The brain is a biophysiosocial system, so there are many factors that can be involved. And in addition, it was between the age groups of people affected, as low-income mothers are also heavily affected by the effects of poverty.
Okay, and if you had more time, what additional research would you have conducted?
Yes, I for sure would have done more research on the effects on low-income mothers, as their education, their nutrition during the pregnancy, and their financial aspects all play a factor. In addition, I would have also liked to to study the effects of generational trauma and how that contributes to predisposed stress in adolescents.